seen in the media is the bricks that actually have been being reported to be dropped off at different locations where these riots have been occurring. In essence, there are these random mysterious bricks that are showing up in different places for people to throw. These are not bricks that are there as a result of a construction site, or bricks that are there that are designed to be used for anything other than anarchy, protest, and injuring and maiming people and property. And so the media hasn't really been showing this. We got a couple of images of those bricks. It's not just one location, but it's actually multiple locations, and a number of different people reporting live from their cell phone camera showing where these bricks are being placed randomly inside these protests to be used to incite violence. So those things, we haven't really been shown. We've been shown the fear and the danger. And remember, kind of tying this back into COVID, what were we told originally? We were told that with COVID, we were told be prepared for 4 to 5% mortality rate. We were told we couldn't stop the spread, but we should try to stop the curve. And we were told that that this disease was going to kill at least 1 million people in the U.S. And we were told this by the same media. And it's not like we were told this directly, from the CDC so much as we were told this by the media. So this lie, this mortality rate that was based on false premises, the media pushed down our throats. The media pushed down social distancing down our throats. The media pushed wear the masks down our throats, even though all the scientists weren't on board or weren't agreeing with these policies. So this was media, right? This was the media that was doing this. Just like the media is pushing a false narrative around these protests. They're showing you images that didn't actually happen. They're showing you things that did happen. They're not showing you things that did happen. I'd like to throw up a couple of other images. Let's see, image number 3 here. Let's look at this, because this is actually, we talk about these protests. A lot of them are peaceful and actually in the right spirit, and they're doing things in the right spirit. This is actually an image of men protecting a police officer as the riots were getting out of control. We didn't see that in the mainstream media. There's another image. We've got image 2 of a young person being hugged by a police officer. I believe that was out of Portland, Oregon. So these are kind of images that we're not being shown. We're not being shown the humanity. What we're being shown is the fear. We're being shown the violence. We're being shown the burning buildings. Now, all that being said, I think we should be being shown both, certainly, and I think we should know why what is this false narrative, and why is this false narrative coming? Again, we've talked about this in the past very recently, that false narrative drives up or increases fear, and many people anger. And so what happens when we're in fear and anger is bad decision making, right? We make decisions out of emotion, or emotional decision making. Bad decisions get made, people get angry, more violence continues, and we have this feeding frenzy that doesn't end. And ultimately, part of what's happened as a result of this frenzy is more rights, more freedom. Curfews have been put in place. Now, I'm not disagreeing with the curfews. I think where there's riots and protests, where there's violence and there's burning, I think certainly the law enforcement has an obligation to protect the people. That's why we pay taxes, is so that law enforcement will protect us. Many of the mayors in a number of these cities have said we're not going to bring in the law enforcement, which I think is quite sad. Those mayors need to be recalled for not doing their job, for not doing their duty. But again, the media is driving this false narrative, and they're not showing you much of the humanity of what's happening, but they're showing you the burning, the fear, and the anger, and that's leading to, in my opinion, more violence, more riots, and more problems. So I think ultimately, we've said it a number of times over the past couple of months as COVID has taken over. Turn off the TV, turn off the media. Don't buy into the hype. They're lying. Now, why are they lying? I think many of us could speculate as to why they're lying. I think there's an agenda, a social agenda that's trying to be pushed. I think part of it is deeper than what most of us know or understand or have access to information to be able to ascertain. But at the same time, it's obviously a narrative. So I don't want to harp and focus too deeply on this topic tonight, but I thought I would just share my thought process around this this very tragic event as it's playing out, and happy to take any of your commentary, questions about it as we go through the show tonight. So I'm going to open it up now for commentary and for questions, and we can dive into that. But one of the things I want to talk about, I want to kind of get back to my roots tonight and talk a little bit about nutrition. We haven't done that in a while, at least in my opinion, in too long of a while. Many of you are probably pretty stressed out about what's going on right now. And it's that stress, that chronic stress, that chronic fear mode, that chronic fight or flight. It's going to eat you alive. It'll eat you alive slowly, as you're all still, many of you, not all of you, but many of you are still in lockdown. Schools are still not starting back up in most places. Social engagement is increased a little bit, but still not in full force, still not starting up in full force. So the stress, now we're worried about the impending stress. There's the economic collapse or the economic crash. We've talked about prepping ahead for that and making sure you have enough food, making sure you have the ability to protect your family, whether that means guns, ammunition, whether it means food, whatever that means, whether it means you need to get with other people and get together, should riots come to your neighborhood, whatever you've got to do to protect your family, just make sure you're prepared. But it's the stress. So I want to talk a little bit tonight about what happens. So we get a stress response, a couple of different things that happen. Number one, we get cortisol elevation. So we get this increase in stress, and cortisol causes, over time, when the stress becomes chronic, causes loss of muscle. And so what's happening to many of you that are locked down is you've been overly stressed out, higher cortisol levels, you've lost some of your muscle mass, which has reduced your metabolic rate. And when your metabolic rate is reduced, you actually gain weight, gain fat, specifically visceral fat. Fat around your heart, fat around your intestine. The type of fat that we know is associated with heart attacks and massive disease. And so this has been ongoing for a number of you, including to a degree myself. And that response, that cortisol increase in cortisol response has this kind of snowball or domino-like effect. Now, you should also be aware that too much excessive cortisol over time depletes things like vitamin D and magnesium and calcium. So over time, magnesium and calcium being electrolytes that are important for neurological function and for the stress response. And so a lot of people will start to develop, aside from developing that muscle loss, under the loss of electrolytes that are important for muscle function, we also get muscle spasms. Muscles start to shorten, they start to spasm, they start to twitch, they start to become prone to injury. So as many of you are under the stress, okay, this is specifically just cortisol on one aspect. We also have another side effect of increased cortisol, which is an elevation in blood sugar. And I've seen this in a lot of my clients as they're coming through the doors the past month or so. We're seeing a lot of people with elevations in their blood sugar as a result of that increased stress load. So that blood sugar increases blood viscosity. So we get a thicker blood, and that's because it glycates the proteins in the blood, making the blood viscosity increase, which puts more pressure on your heart and puts more pressure on your vascular tree, on your peripheral vascular tree. It makes it harder for blood and oxygen to get into those tissues. So we get that increase in blood sugar, increase in viscosity, and that increase in sugar increases the risk for chronic, I'm just going to abbreviate here, chronic degenerative disease. So, it's not the one time, it's not like the acute stress where somebody jumped out from behind a door and scared you and your cortisol, jumped up very quickly and then recovered. This is the chronic stress. This is the stress that many of you are facing because, number one, you thought a disease was coming to kill you. Number two, you may have lost your ability to earn your livelihood, and then that stress buckles. Number three, with that loss of livelihood comes a how am I going to feed my family? How am I going to pay my rent, etc.? And that chronic stress again, setting in a very, very big way, increasing the risk. This is what we're actually in for. If this madness continues to persist, many of you are going to continue to buckle under this continued load of stress, which is why I encourage you to turn off the TV and focus on what you can actually be doing in your life to improve your life, and don't focus on the stories and the narrative that many of the media outlets are trying to get you to dive into. So again, this is one aspect. Okay, so cortisol increase, blood sugar increase, but one of the other things that chronic stress is going to drive up is it's going to drive up adrenaline, and it's going to drive up noradrenaline as well. Now, these are neurotransmitters, chemicals produced by your adrenal glands that over time are going to ramp up your sympathetic nervous system. So you get this impact. Should I spell that right for you? You get this impact on the fight or flight system. So you've ramped up your fight or flight system. You know, if we look at long-term, kind of what that does is, one, it reduces your ability to digest. So it shuts off your digestive tract. It reduces your ability to sleep well. Okay, so those are two aspects of what, you know, physiological impacts of what happens when sympathetic nervous system is turned on too high and too hard. Again, you don't digest as well, you don't sleep as well. What happens when you don't digest as well is you don't get vitamins and minerals, the nutrients from the food. You don't process those and get those and access those as well. But secondarily to that, when you're not sleeping, you're not healing and repairing. And so when you're not healing and you're not repairing, you're not properly sleeping, it's going to create a feedback loop, and it's going to increase your stress. And so we get this in perpetuity of this problem just continuing to feed itself. It becomes self-feeding, like a snowball that starts out small at the top of the mountain. And as it rolls, it picks up steam, it picks up mass until it creates an avalanche. And here's what we don't want to see happen to you. I don't want to see any of you having this process go on any longer than what's necessary, where it wrecks you, where it crashes your health, because it's when you get to that point where your health is now crashed that you can't take care of your family. So the best way that you can take care of your family is by taking care of yourself, by not allowing this to get the upper hand and get the best of you. So make sure that you're supporting your stress mechanism. And part of how, you know, we can control this adrenaline, there's a couple different things. In my opinion, one of the best ways to do it is prayer. For those of you that may not be as religious, you know, things like meditation, deep breathing exercises can also be helpful to control the level of adrenaline, noradrenaline secretion that are driving that sympathetic response. The other thing that you can do, you know, with curfews and lockdown that are still in place depending on where you live, you know, you've got a family, hopefully you've got a family, spend time with them. Because when this thing lifts, or when we force it to lift as citizens, you might find that this is going to be harder to come by when you're fighting to try to find your way to earn a living again. So again, you know, these two things can kind of reduce that sympathetic nervous tone and help you to maintain your digestion and maintain your sleep. Now, what I'm not saying here, so what I'm trying to teach you is that I'm not saying that you shouldn't have stress, and I'm not saying that stress is necessarily even a bad thing right now. I think stress is built in on purpose. I think we have the ability to create these hormones and these chemicals on purpose, and I think sometimes they're necessary. And we're living through a time where I think in part a lot of this is absolutely necessary, because stress also drives, as much as it can drive, the stress response can drive the wrong style of behavior, because you're potentially thinking in your limbic brain. You can be under stress but still keep a calm, cool, collected head around you so that you can make intelligent decisions. And so sometimes stress kicks us into gear, again, as long as you're not heightened in the sense where you're making bad decisions from your limbic brain. Sometimes stress can put us into a mode where we're put in a place where we need to make decisions, and we make them much quicker, as opposed to as opposed to procrastinating around them when we're not under certain types of stress. So stress is not always bad, but it's that chronic stress. If you let it overwhelm you, if you let it get to you to this level, it's going to create a major problem. So what can you do nutritionally right now, aside from, we've got prayer, we've got meditation, we've got family time, which are action steps that you can take in your current life to kind of try to help mitigate to a certain degree some of this. But then we've also got, again, some of the other side effects of that increase in blood sugar, that reduction or that loss of muscle. So one of the things, I've talked about this a number of times, but one of the things that you can be doing right now and that you should be doing is also making sure you're not stopping your exercise. What happens to a lot of people is when the stress comes, they quit exercising or they quit being physically active. It's a huge mistake. And it's because when you are already in a state of catabolic breakdown as a result of cortisol, you don't want to send another message to your body saying, hey, we don't need the muscle. You want to send the message to your body that yes, you're under stress, but yes, you still need this muscle. And this way you don't suffer through the muscle atrophy, the water retention, the weight gain, the visceral fat increase. So exercise becomes very important. Now, one of the things under stress too that you do have to keep in mind is you may not want to do as severe of exercise as what you might do when you're not under stress. In essence, don't work yourself into the ground with your exercise, but make sure you maintain a consistent flow of it. My best advice I can give you, simplest thing that you can do in this type of time is a style of workout called a Tabata workout. These are really quick workouts. They're about 4 minutes long. And use body weight activities for these exercises. So a Tabata is a 4-minute exercise routine. I've talked about this too in the past, where you pick a body weight movement like a push-up, set your alarm clock for 4 minutes, do 20 seconds of push-ups followed by 10 seconds of rest. Do that 8 times, and that accumulates over a 4-minute period of time, right? So do 8 rounds of that, and that's 4 minutes, and that's half of your workout routine for the day. So you can pick 2 Tabatas, it's a Tabata times 2, where again, you're not overworking your muscles, you're not working yourself into the ground, and you're still capable of functioning, and you're not depleting your energy and your resources to such a great degree, combined with chronic stress, that you can't continue to function. So that Tabata, prayer, meditation, family time, again, all things that you want to make sure that you're focusing on. And then the other thing that happens during this time, diet-wise, nutritionally-wise, is that increase in stress increases your blood sugar. And one of the other side effects is it increases sugar craving. So what happens to a lot of people is they gravitate toward those foods that give them the most comfort, those foods that give them I call them the nursery foods, is the foods that maybe when you grew up with, that your mom or dad gave you, that gave you comfort, right? Your comfort foods, whether that's, some type of ice cream, or whether that's some type of cakes, cookies, pastries, whatever that might be, whatever it is for you. For some people, it's chocolate, whatever that is. But again, that increases in sugar craving. And the problem with that is the more sugar you eat, the more you feed the beast. So that sugar craving, if you follow through with it, we all have yeast in our GI tracts, but what happens to a lot of people is the higher the sugar count, higher the sugar goes, the more predilection toward growing excessive quantities of yeast in the GI tract, and that can go systemic, creating chronic inflammation, among other things. So again, you got to watch out for this too, because this can sneak up. And this, for some people, is not sugar, but we could just draw another element in here. It's also alcohol. And so you increase your alcohol. Remember that alcohol calorically is second only to fat in terms of its total caloric intake. It's higher, 7 calories per gram is what you get when you're using alcohol. But there's also there's a lot of sugar in alcohol. So again, increase sugar through consumption of alcohol, and it's like a double hit, because alcohol is an immunosuppressant and can cause inflammation and can cause liver damage, among other things. So if you become a chronic alcohol drinker during this time, what you're doing is you're feeding that mechanism through biochemical stress, and you don't want to get it caught into that ordeal either. So again, a lot of elements off of this central theme of increased stress that you want to be watching out for right now. Now, some of my favorite things to get through stress, nutrient support through stress. One of my favorite It's the same thing I talked about for immune system support, and that is vitamin C. Vitamin C is critical during times of stress. Humans need more vitamin C when they're under chronic stress. And research studies show, and again, this isn't human research, but in animal studies, goats as an example, goats will make 15 to 20 grams of vitamin C a day when they're put under stress. And the reason why we use goats is because humans can't make their own vitamin C, so goats can make their own vitamin C. So we're trying to get an idea for the what's called conditional need of an animal when high stress levels hit. So increasing vitamin C during times of intense stress where we don't see a kind of a light at the end of the tunnel, we don't know when that stress is going to end, can sometimes be a very, very effective way. Remember, one of the things vitamin C helps to do is it helps to make sure that you don't run out of adrenaline, noradrenaline, and also dopamine. Dopamine is another neurotransmitter, and vitamin C is necessary. You need vitamin C in order to be able to properly produce dopamine, which is our happy hormone. Without it, we can become depressed, we can become fatigued and lethargic, we can develop things like muscle tremors. So there are a lot of side effects that come into low vitamin C inducing dopamine deficit. So vitamin C is one of those things that you can do during times of intense stress. One of my other favorites is pantothenic acid, PA, I'll abbreviate it, but that's vitamin B5. Vitamin B5 is nickname. It's actually discovered by a famous biochemist by the name of Roger Williams. And this B vitamin is called the anti-stress factor or the anti-graying factor. And so vitamin B5 plays a major, major role in your adrenal glands being able to keep up when under stress. So I'd say if you could only pick two nutrients for acute or for intense chronic stress, vitamin C and pantothenic acid are the two that I would recommend. Beyond that, certainly you want to make sure you're eating well, you're eating organically. Again, don't fall into that whole line of where we come over here and we start craving, our blood sugar's already going up, but now we start craving, we start making poor dietary decisions. That'll just get you into more trouble. So again, the vitamin C, the vitamin B5, very, very important in terms of times of chronic stress without end. Now, there's some other things that you can do nutritionally, and they're kind of less to do with vitamins and minerals, but understand that and what some people do, and if you eat organ meat, this is great. You can, if you actually have access to adrenal gland, but there's a type of supplement called an adrenal glandular, and these are basically adrenal organ gland in capsule form that you can swallow, and it contains a number of different nutrients, a number of different chemical compounds that can help support you through times of great stress. So this is another addition that you can add on. The other thing you need to know is the higher and the longer you have stress, the more you're going to lose, as just a general rule of thumb. So increased stress leads to an increase of vitamin and mineral excretion. And this has been studied in humans. It's been studied a number of times, as we know that during times of intense stress, we actually have nutritional deficiencies that can start to occur because the body's burning through more of those nutrients. But in many ways, we also excrete more of those nutrients in the urine during times of long-term stress. So you can become quite malnourished. So the other thing I highly recommend that you taking during times of stress like this is a quality multivitamin. So something that has, the vitamins and the main minerals in it to support you and to support your body's ability to continue to be able to function during those times. So again, back to my core message, which is nutritional biochemistry. I wanted to get back to that tonight. We've been so focused on COVID, and now we're having riots in the street. A lot of you are really worried. I wanted to give you something tangible that you could take away today. It would really give you the ability to preserve your health as we go through this very, very unpredictable year so far of 2020. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the floor for any questions that any of you might have, and we'll we'll dive into those. So Dave wants to know, Dr. Osborne, what do you feed your children for breakfast? Well, great question, Dave. I don't have any kids nowadays. My youngest is actually 18, graduated from high school, but I can certainly share with you most mornings what he's eating are eggs and typically eggs and fruit are a major staple for breakfast for my kids. So if you're talking about, during the school year, usually parents want to feed their kids as they're going off to school because they won't have an opportunity to eat for quite a long time. So eggs is an option. We also make a homemade sausage out of, you can make it out of bison, you can also make it out of beef. And, we use herbs and spices to basically to give it good flavor. And then we put it in a pan, and it's not a frying that we do with it. We just put it in the water and we simmer heat it until it's done. And that also is sometimes what we'll cook as a breakfast food. So if you're trying to kind of keep the ideology around what a traditional breakfast might seem like, many of you get fixated or stuck on breakfast being breakfast, like cereal, toast, eggs, ham, that kind of stuff. Well, breakfast sausage or eggs are what are considered for most to be traditional breakfast foods. So those are just a couple of ideas that you can do. Another question, what's a good children's probiotic? Well, I have something, it's a probiotic we have. It's a powdered version of probiotic. You can find that on Gluten Free Society. It's called Biotic Defense. And it's perfectly safe for children. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, so I find that commentary quite interesting. Karen says, Karen in the red zone in Pennsylvania went to Home Depot and Whole Foods without a mask and no one said a word. That, going back to what we were talking about earlier, that's kind of another contradiction of what we've heard, is that everybody wanted us to wear masks and social distance. And if you really want to get into some of the reasons why I think the mask issue was pushed forward to such a great degree without really any great science to back it, is because I think there's a hidden agenda. I think that the masks allow for people to not protest, but to riot, and the identities not to be known, because there's now evidence coming to light that these riots have been planned for even longer than the death of George, of George Floyd, who was murdered. Even before that, these riots, there's some evidence showing that these things were planned well in advance. Almost makes you even question the death itself, and I don't want to get into that tonight, because we can go down a rabbit hole that I don't think some of you want to go down, and that's just not my expertise either. I'm not a private investigator that I want to go down that rabbit hole. So Melanie wants to know, can you test for cortisol? Yes, you can. Cortisol can be tested, and really, if you're under chronic stress and you can't figure out why you're tired, you wake up super exhausted, you should test for cortisol. Cortisol is a circadian hormone, meaning it changes based on the time of the day. So generally speaking, cortisol in the early morning is very high, and as later morning, noon approaches, the cortisol levels drop, and then as the afternoon approaches, they drop a little bit more, and then as night approaches, it drops a little bit more. So cortisol kind of follows almost like an L-shaped curve, more of a U-ish L-shaped curve over the course of the day, and you should have it checked. If you're going to try to get an accurate assessment of what your circadian cortisol pattern is, you should have it checked at all 4 different times. So somewhere upon waking, then have it checked again around noon, have it checked again around 4 p.m., and then have it checked again before bedtime. Proper way to check cortisol. And some doctors will draw it in the blood. It's a little bit more challenging to do cortisol because you got to get your blood drawn 4 days. Not 4 days, but at 4 different time points in a day, which is a little bit onerous. Or some doctors will actually measure cortisol in the saliva, which is an accurate representation, an accurate way to look at it. Elizabeth wants to know, can I comment on rheumatoid arthritis? Can it be reversed? Oh, great question, Elizabeth, and I'm a little biased here. If you don't know this, I wrote a book published by Simon & Schuster, national and international bestseller, called No Grain, No Pain. And, the very first chapter, you can read some testimony in the book. You can read some actual stories of, patients with rheumatoid arthritis who put it in remission without medication. So to answer your question, yes, it can be reversed. And it's a big premise of why I do what I do is because of rheumatoid arthritis is actually what got me going down the path and looking at functional medicine in a much bigger way. So yes, it can be reversed. Let's see here. Is sugar in fruit bad when you're fighting sugar addiction? Not necessarily, but it can be. Depends. It's a quantity issue. It's not that fruit sugar is necessarily bad or evil, because it's not, but it's a quantity issue. For example, you know, when you buy the grapes in the store, you don't eat the whole bunch. You don't eat a pound of grapes. It's, you know, it's kind of a serving size. A quarter cup would be considered a decent serving size of that. And so most people don't stop at that quantity, and they end up eating, you know, a half a pound of grapes, and it's the quantity. So it's a quantity issue, not necessarily that fruit sugar is bad. Generally, when I'm teasing somebody down and away from sugar, we try to keep their quantities to about 1.5 cups of total fruit per day, and we remove any kind of dried fruit. So there would be no, you know, for example, dried mangoes or raisins or dried cherries or those types of things that are going to be much more concentrated in sugar because they're dehydrated. And what's left as the water is pulled out, what you have left are very, very small pieces of dried fruit. And again, generally people tend to way overeat those, and you can eat a lot of sugar eating dried fruit. How to stop emotional eating? I've gained weight since the lockdown. Penny wants to know. So emotional eating is one of those things that if you've got, you know, you've got to identify that emotion that's your trigger. What is your trigger emotion? And first recognizing what that trigger emotion is a very important part of how to stop emotional eating. So once you can kind of understand that, you can understand what that trigger emotion is, then you can, you know, reverse engineer what are the triggers that get you into the mindset of having that emotion. That really is one of the most effective ways to stop, you know, the psychological component to overeating. But that's where I would begin. Start with what is the emotion, and secondarily start with what is the trigger to that emotion that makes you feel that way, and then start working backwards and removing the trigger to that emotion the best that you can. And then secondary to that, you can also add in, if that emotion comes in, because we don't necessarily want to block our emotions. Our emotions are an outlet so that we don't like kill each other right at the end of the day. You want to create new habits around that emotion. So recognizing what that trigger is so that you can create a new habit around when you're feeling that way. Jean says, Dr. Osborne, you don't look old enough for an 18-year-old child. Yeah, my oldest son is actually much older. He's 25. So yeah, I've got, my oldest is 25. So yeah, I don't. It's because, Gene, I practice what I preach, and that's what I want for all of you as well. Karen wants to know, can taking collagen cause anxiety? Generally, not typically, no. Collagen what I have seen collagen do is it doesn't necessarily trigger anxiety, you know, because of a chemical in it, but it can for many people. Collagen is too thick, it's too hard for them to digest, and so it triggers stress on the GI tract, which then can stimulate vagal nerve to create an anxiety type of response. So chemically speaking, no, but if collagen is difficult for you to digest, I've seen that be the case in some people, and that's not a common thing. What some people will have to do is water down the collagen so that it's not quite as thick, so that it's easier, a little bit easier on the digestive tract, especially those of you who are struggling with chronic digestive disorders and you've heard or read something about how good collagen is for you, and you've started to take it as a regular supplement. For some people, that's just not a good idea. It can actually backfire. Barbara wants to know, are IV vitamins better than oral capsules? No, they're not. I would say if you can avoid IV, avoid IV. Now, if you're so malnourished and your GI tract is in such disrepair, then, you know, sometimes IV is a solution. But remember, your gut and your gut properly functioning, whether it's supplements or food, should be the main mechanism by which you try to achieve your nutrition adequacy. You don't want to rely on a IV bag or having to get injections, because again, that's not that your GI tract, if it's functioning, if it's working, you shouldn't require those first and foremost. I like this comment. A nation of sheep will soon have a government of wolves. I couldn't agree with you more. That's why I'm very concerned about what's going on right now with the curfews and the shutdowns and the mask wearing and all the other nonsense that, again, that a very intentional media has deliberately lied to us and insinuated and basically stoked the fires of fear during this time. So, Sarah, I have celiac. When I'm out walking, my eyes start burning. Fumes from restaurants, I think because they're cooking wheat. I'm outside and never go inside, but I still react. I'm grain-free. Help. It's hard to say. You may have some other issues, Sarah. Even if you're grain-free, I mean, you could have external allergens of things that are outside and not necessarily the restaurant. But of course, if it doesn't happen unless you're walking by the burning fumes of a restaurant, that's a little different matter. Now, one of the things you might attempt to do, there's a supplement that can support your allergic response called Histocyst, and that can help support your mast cells so they don't break open, releasing the histamine, causing the itchiness or the other symptoms typically associated with exposure. So that might be beneficial or helpful for you, and you might give that a try. Outside of that, avoid walking in those areas. And sometimes I realize that can be hard to do. Brenda says, my apolipoprotein B is 154 and lipoprotein A is 469. How concerned should I be? So there's not a whole lot you can do about lipoprotein A. If it's 469, I mean, I have seen two things that can lower lipoprotein A. Now, that being said, why do we want to lower it? Some believe it's a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. In all of my experience with lipoprotein A, generally speaking, I've never seen somebody die from a heart attack because they had lipoprotein A elevations. Typically, people that have heart attack or stroke or other cardiovascular events, it has a lot more to do with their lifestyle and their choices and their diet, and their behavior is highly inflammatory. And so lipoprotein A is not independently going to be the thing that creates that problem for them. That being said, two things I've seen lower lipoprotein A. One is vitamin C. It doesn't do it in everybody, but I have seen it lower it. Although, again, if you're at 169, it's not going to lower it substantially enough. I mean, 10 grams a day, you might get a 15-point reduction. The other is a carnivore diet. I've seen carnivore diets actually reduce people's lipoprotein A, and that's kind of a more aggressive diet. It's not something I recommend that people do, on a consistent, regular basis for the rest of their lives. Some people, especially people that have severe digestive problems as it relates to eating fruits and vegetables and FODMAPs, can do well for a time on a carnivore-based type diet, minimizing fruits and vegetables for a time as their GI tract makes a recovery. But it's just not a diet I would recommend, lifelong to follow in the name of lowering lipoprotein A. Dazzle Me Red says, what's the name of the book again? It's No Grain, No Pain. I think we can probably throw a link up. You can pick it up on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or any other major book carrier, but No Grain, No Pain book.com. If you order it off that site and leave us your receipt number, we'll send you a free gift. So if you're going to order it, go ahead and get the free gift while you're at it, right? Let's see. Margie says, I use a body lotion with oat kernel flour in it. Am I gluten from it? Hard to say. I don't recommend people with a known history of celiac or gluten sensitivity use products that contain oat. There's research studies that show oats can be just as inflammatory, even though the FDA will allow the labeling of oats to be gluten-free. But remember, your skin's an organ. It digests and absorbs, in a sense digests. It absorbs things from the lotion. And so some doctors would argue that the particle or the Dalton size of the molecule is too big to penetrate through the skin. I would argue that if you've got poor health and you have a leaky or a poor skin barrier, then those particles, just like with a leaky gut, are going to penetrate and get through into your bloodstream and potentially create problems. So it's just not something I would recommend. Can a typhoid infection cause leaky gut? Yes, any type of infection can trigger intestinal hyperpermeability or leaky gut. So the answer to that, pretty simply, yes. Paige wants to know, in order for me to exercise more, I need my joints to be healthier. What can I take other than turmeric, glucosamine, and chondroitin with MSM? So that's kind of so you need your joints to be healthier. So I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. If maybe you mean that when you try to exercise, your joints hurt and there's a kind of a pain issue that occurs. So one of the things I would suggest, if it's a pain, then there are a couple of things you can do. Actually, I would do them concomitantly together. Number one is 5 grams of vitamin C. Number two is 4 to 6 grams of quercetin. And what I would recommend is a product called Detox C that I recommend, along with another product called Ultra Q that would give you those higher doses to help support that inflammatory response and to support that joint health for you. The other thing, Paige, that you might want to consider, again, is working directly with the doctor. A doctor can measure your vitamin mineral levels because it's possible you could have, like, for example, a zinc deficiency and not know it, magnesium deficiency and not know it. These minerals are important for joint integrity and joint function, and you may not be getting enough. And those are just examples. I mean, there are 40 different essential nutrients. So having a doctor who's thorough and can test you for those things is important. Many of you have asked me, I get this all the time. Dr. Osborne, I didn't realize that you still saw people. I'm never going to quit seeing people. It's actually one of my it's part of how I feel I can maintain my integrity is to continue to practice, because if I don't practice, then I stop learning. And a doctor, once they quit practice and they're just reading literature and just reading research and reporting on information, they somewhat lose their in the trenches. They don't lose their past experience, but they lose sight on updates and new things that might change or things that might come along, and so they kind of lose an advantage, in my opinion. So it's something that I never intend on stopping in the future. Let's see. So Donna says, you mentioned that we should try to get our nutrition through our digestive system. What about B12? My mom's doctor wants to start taking B12 in a pill. Would it be better to get a sublingual? So the great thing about a sublingual, Donna, is that it works both ways. Is you get some through the cheeks, which is part of your GI tract. Remember, your GI tract is the tube from your mouth to your anus. So sublingual is probably going to be better absorbed if your mother has any type of history of gastrointestinal dysfunction or problems. And most elderly people do, because they're on multiple medications that impact their stomach acid or impact their digestive enzyme secretion, or that cause leaky gut or some other type of damage. I mean, just look at most of your blood pressure medications damage the GI tract, steroids damage the GI tract, pain medications damage the GI tract, cholesterol medications damage the GI tract. So, again, a lot of your common used meds impact the GI tract and its capacity to digest and absorb. And a lot of common meds also, too, will cause the vitamin B12 deficiency. Like, for example, I don't know if you guys saw this recently, metformin being recalled on the market right now. There's 4 different manufacturers of metformin. It's being recalled because of some type of contamination issues. But that particular drug is used for diabetics to control blood sugar, and it depletes vitamin B12. So again, sublingual is a better way to go because you go right into the cheeks to the bloodstream. Now, that being said, a pill can be effective if you've got a healthy GI tract as well. B12 being high, if you're talking about serum B12 levels, they're not worth the paper they're printed on, so I wouldn't use serum B12 as a measure for accurately assessing vitamin B12 levels. If you're referring to intracellular vitamin B12, that's a different matter. But most people, I should say many doctors, I mean, if we look at all the doctors in the world, how many of them are actually board certified to practice nutrition clinically? They're probably 365, 370 at last count, myself being one of them. It's a board specialty that very few doctors pursue because nutrition is not It's not a sexy profession. It's considered kind of, well, think about what nutrition is called in college. In college 101 classes, nutrition is referred to as home economics. Not too sexy for doctors, for people that are training to go on to get a doctorate degree. So, it's just doesn't have that high profile that some of the other specialties do. So, but finding a doc that can measure those things might help you quite a bit ascertain whether your B12 is actually high or whether your B12 in your serum is high, which is misleading. Let's see, Bonnie wants to know, Dr. Osborne, are there people that should not take Immune Shield? Not really. I mean, again, it becomes a why do you want to take it type of an issue. It has a purpose and a function. And so are there people that shouldn't take it? People that don't need it predominantly. But that's pretty much it. I would say, what is the need? If you've got a history of low antibody production or low immune system function, low white counts, Immune Shield is designed to help support your immune system so that as you're eating, the things that you're eating, even remember, every time you eat, there's good and bad, and even in good foods, there are bad things. And so the job of your gut is to act as a quarantine zone so that it can extrapolate the good from the bad, and you can poop out the bad. And some of you don't have adequate quantities of mucosal antibodies being produced, and that's really what Immune Shield was designed to do. It was designed to help kind of support your immunity in your GI tract if you're trying to come back from, from years of GI problems, especially those of you that have that history of gluten sensitivity, just learning about it and trying to make those diet changes. Let's see here. Yeah, it's a sad state of affairs. Jean says, I've given up on going to any doctor where I am, nothing but the allopathic docs. I haven't been to a regular doctor for 4 years. Far be it from me to tell any of you not to go see a doctor, but fundamentally, the way I see it, the problem with the vast majority of doctors is really very few of them want to actually listen to you. Very few of them will listen to you. The vast majority of them, I call it pseudo-compassion. They, under the guise of compassion, and I don't think it's pseudo-compassion to them. I think they truly are trying to be compassionate. I call it pseudo-compassion because it's really false compassion. When you rob somebody of their ability to interpret their body's messaging in the sake of appeasing their pain or appeasing their discomfort without teaching them why the discomfort exists in the first place, it's not compassionate at all. That's why I call it pseudo-compassion. It's masking the problem. It's duct taping the pipe in hopes that the water won't flood your floor, but it's not really fixing the pipe itself. That's the core issue in allopathy. Let's see. Do you think escaping? Oh, it looks like we lost the comment there. Okay. How do you know? It's a classic question. Matt says, how do you know if you're gluten intolerant? Genetic testing. And the better way to say it, Matt, and this is not me trying to pick on you at all. This is just, I want there to be clarity. It's not really gluten intolerance. It's gluten sensitivity. And the definitions are different, and they do matter. But the best way to know whether or not you're going to react to gluten when you're consuming it is to have genetic testing done. You can ask your doctor for genetic testing in that regard. Again, many doctors won't run it. If you can't get your doctor to run it, you can certainly go to glutenfreesociety.org, our foundation, and you can get access to genetic testing to help you to determine that. There's also on glutenfreesociety.org, and I don't know if we have that link we can put up now for our quiz. We have a quiz that you can take. Now, this quiz, it's a handful of questions that you can answer yes or no to about symptoms that you're having. And it's not going to be definitive. So it's not going to be definitive to say, oh, yes, you are definitely gluten sensitive. But it might steer you down the track as to whether or not going further and doing genetic testing would be the right move. Now, those of you who have been following a gluten-free diet for years and your health and your symptoms are relatively okay, taking this quiz doesn't do you much good, because if you take the quiz but you're already gluten-free and you're experiencing the benefits of gluten-free, then you're probably going to find that the quiz gives you a false negative result, not because you're not gluten sensitive, but because you're not eating gluten and experiencing the symptoms that gluten might cause you to have, which are the questions that we ask within the quiz. Let's see. Sarah says, I had a gastroenterologist tell me I was nuts. He told me all my problems were caused by my thoughts. You know, that's a classic, right? You know, the doctor projects their inadequacy on you because they don't want to spend the time to help you, or they don't have the knowledge to be able to assess and help you in the way that you need. Again, most traditional doctors are, you know, it's see nail, use hammer. It's a kind of one-size-fits-all approach. Everything that comes through the door, unfortunately, is a nail. And the only tool in their tool belt is a hammer. Actually, a hammer and a mallet, maybe, because surgery and drugs, those are the two primary tools that most doctors use. And again, if surgery or a medicine is an appropriate thing to do for a person, it's one thing. But, you know, the only drug I know of to date, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the only drug that I know that cures any disease is an antibiotic. It actually cures the infection if you have a bacterial infection. It can, and it can save your life. But the vast majority of pretty much every other pharmaceutical is designed for symptom management. That's not a cure, and it's not addressing the real reason that you have your problem. Let's see, can alopecia areata be reversed? Kira wants to know. Kira, go check out, if you go check out our YouTube channel, actually have a case study that I think would interest you quite a bit, of a person over a year's period of time, a woman that came to see me. And when she first came to see me, she had massive hair loss on her scalp. And, you know, within 6 months, she had about 40% regrowth. And within about a year, she had about 95% regrowth. So to answer your question, yes, alopecia areata can be reversed. Now, what I have seen that I've seen where people started regrowing hair, but somebody with a full head that's completely bald, the alopecia areata has damaged them to such an extent where they're completely bald, and they've been so for a number of years. In those types of cases where the skin has completely lost its hair follicle, I haven't seen that be reversed. But if you've got, you know, patches, nummular, round patches of hair loss, yes, those can come back. Those can grow back. You don't have to inject your scalp with steroids, which is the standard of care in today's world. Let's see. Somebody's asking me if I follow Q. If you mean quercetin, I follow the research on quercetin, but no, if you're talking about Q, you know, the unknown, what many people consider to be conspiracy theorists, no, not really. I follow my heart, and I follow my own intelligent, logical observations about the world. Generally, it's, you know, that's what I try to do, and that's what I encourage all of you to do. Do you offer food sensitivity testing too? Deandra wants to know. Yeah, so for food sensitivity testing, it's a little bit more advanced, Deandra. At this time, currently, we only do that when somebody comes in as a client. We don't do that as a service to the world. We're actually investigating the potential legally to maybe bring that out so that people can have greater degrees of access to it. But at this point, I don't want you to hold your breath. I don't want to promise anything because it's too soon to know. Let's see here. Can glucosamine supplements help with joint pain so it's easier to exercise? Yeah, they can. Glucosamine, there's some really good research on glucosamine for some people. It can be very effective. I would say if you're going to take glucosamine, combine it with MSM. And if you're looking for a good version of that, you can check out Ultra Joint. It's got glucosamine, chondroitin, and MSM in it as a combination. I like that. Linda says, I eat salmon, avocado, and veggies for breakfast. So going back to one of the first questions that was asked, that's just another feedback for you. Thanks, Linda, for sharing that. And anyone else who has a breakfast idea they want to share with Dave, just, you know, type it in. I'm sure Dave would be happy to see those ideas. Christy wants to know, you briefly mentioned yeast overgrowth. Do you have any tips for yeast in the throat for adults? The number one thing that you have to do, Christy, in yeast overgrowth is identify the origin or the source. So many people try to do yeast detoxes. They try to take products, but they don't identify the source of the yeast and where it's coming from, or why the immune system is so weak that it allowed yeast to overgrow. Remember, we all have yeast in our GI tract. There's actually something, we've all heard of the term microbiome, but very few people really talk about what's known as the mycobiome. Myco refers to yeast, and you have a mycobiome, and it's when you have an aggressive overgrowth that it can become a problem. So it's not that we're all shooting and aiming for zero yeast. We're shooting for adequate normalization of our microbiome, just like we don't want bacterial growing out of control. Some of those bacteria are known to create major problems and trigger autoimmune disease. Same thing with yeast or fungus. So you got to find out where the source is coming from. So going back to that, for a lot of people, it's the alcohol, it's the sugar, it's the diet, it's the gluten suppressing their immune system, not giving them the capacity to fight, or it's chronic antibiotic use, or it's drinking water that's not properly filtered, or it's drinking water with a lot of chlorine and fluoride because those act as antibiotics on the GI tract, suppressing bacterial growth, allowing for fungal overgrowth to occur. So there are a number of different things. If you want to learn a little bit more in depth about that topic, I've got a video on that you can check out on our media archive channel, and it's all about yeast overgrowth, and you can check that out in a little bit more detail. Pamela says, I do all the things you say, do not lose weight, not stressed, and sleep fairly well most nights. So if you're doing everything right, Pamela, you might have an undisclosed food allergen that's driving your biochemical stress. So driving this biochemically, not necessarily emotional stress, but biochemical stress, or a chemical exposure in some of the things that you're getting exposed to. It's also possible that you have an environmental issue that's creating, from the outside in, that's creating an inflammation. Some people living in chronic mold have that issue. And it's also possible you're just overeating calories. A lot of people that go on a no grain, no pain diet, it can be easier to overdo the fat. And so if you start overdoing the fat, what can end up happening is you get into trouble with your total caloric load. And so even if you're exercising and doing everything else right, you might just be eating too many calories. So a good place to start too is just by counting your macronutrients and making sure that you're, again, I'm going to assume you're a woman, but without knowing your height, age, or weight, it's hard really to judge. But, I'll give you an example. A woman who's, 5'3", 5'4", weighs 120 pounds, kind of as a normal, if they're eating 1,600, 1,700 calories a day, they're not going to lose weight if they're trying to, because it's too much for their height and weight. It's a caloric overload issue. So sometimes it's a matter of just the old-fashioned counting calories, although that doesn't work if you haven't dialed in your diet, if you don't sleep, if you're not doing healthy things. Counting calories is going to work less effectively for you. But if you're doing everything that I talk about and still not losing weight, that may be part of the issue. Let's see here. Hi, Cher says, hi, I love your show. Thanks, Cher. Is there something that can be done for recurrent MRSA infections? I'm constantly given antibiotics and don't want to keep taking them. So the first thing I would ask your doctor is, okay, if you're having a MRSA infection, what are the symptoms? So like, what is the ramification and the manifestation of the MRSA infection? Or is it just something that was randomly found on a lab test? Because a person can have the growth of methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. In essence, you can have Staph aureus in your body. I see it all the time in people that don't have active infections. So are they treating it prophylactically because it's there? Or are they treating it because you're having symptoms? And so that would be the number one question, because if they're treating it and you're not really symptomatic, then you have to reevaluate why they're actually treating it. So we're running down on the time and the questions aren't stopping. Love all the recipe ideas that are coming in. Keep going here. We'll take one or two more. Can cortisol from chronic stress stall weight loss even if someone is following a keto diet? Sure it can. The cortisol is the ruiner of weight loss. It is the absolute ruiner. If you want to guarantee an ineffective weight loss program, put somebody under too much stress and drive up their cortisol. Guaranteed to stop weight loss. And this is why a lot of people go on these programs, these calorie-restricted diets. They're initially successful, but then it fails because one way that you can elevate cortisol is by over-restricting your calories. So again, a calorie restriction diet can actually lead to the chronic stress that leads to the weight gain. And you can't maintain a calorie-restricted diet forever. It's just not healthy, nor is it something that you should attempt at doing. Okay, last question here. How dangerous is zinc oxide? It's not dangerous. Zinc oxide's not dangerous, Chucho. It's just not effective. Zinc oxide is not very well absorbed. So as a form of zinc, its bioavailability is very poor. So you have to take a lot more zinc oxide to get the same amount of zinc that you would use if you were using like a zinc citrate or a zinc picolinate. It's just your body doesn't recognize zinc oxide as well. So again, it's not dangerous if you're talking about oral. Now, if you're talking about sunscreen, is it dangerous? There's some sunscreens contain a zinc oxide. Not dangerous, perfectly fine to use. All right, folks, we've hit the wall on time. Look, if you are new to the show, if this is your first exposure to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain, come back and join us every Monday, 6 p.m. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and go pick up some freebies from me. If you visit my foundation, glutenfreesociety.org, sign up for our newsletter. It's the world's largest, #1 gluten-free newsletter, and you'll get some freebies when you sign up for that, and we'll send you weekly reminders and a newsletter that will help keep you updated on healthy diet and lifestyle as you're trying to navigate any type of health issue that you might be struggling with. So again, thanks for joining me on Monday night. Thanks for spending your time with me. Hope everybody out there stays safe and focuses on what needs to be focused on. Don't buy into the hype. Don't buy into the hate. The media wants you all to hate each other. Don't buy into it. Hug your neighbor, love your neighbor, take your mask off. Remember, the CDC now has even admitted the lie that the mortality rate of COVID-19 is more like 0.26, which is less than influenza, by the way. So now we know this thing, you don't wear a mask for a cold and flu season. Don't wear a mask. Don't suffer yourself and suffocate yourself and create the ability for protesters mimicking protesters to riot anonymously, because that's really what I think. Anyway, we won't go there. That's what I think a lot of this is about. We're going to end the show. Have a great week. We'll see you next Monday night. Hey, don't forget to tune in next week, same time, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, for another Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain show. Bring all your toughest health questions to me. I look forward to answering them. And before you leave today, make sure you hit subscribe. And once you do, click that bell. That bell is going to allow us to remind you right before we go live. But it's also going to allow us to remind you when we come out with other video content all week long. We've got lots of episodes coming your way all week long, and I don't want you to miss anything. So again, subscribe, hit that bell so that you can get notified when we have that new information put up for you. Thanks so much, and I'm wishing you excellent health. Have a great week. We'll see you next Monday night.